Tak Brad vlastně dělá kurzy jako i pro anomália. Umí hodně dobře rigovat, má vlastně 25 let zkušeností s rigováním, pracoval pro jako docela velké firmy a docela na epických projektech doslova. A zároveň vlastně má ten svůj projekt Rigging Dojo a tam vlastně jakoby učí taky lidi rigovat a bude nám tady přednášet o 5 featurách v Blenderu, které jsou takový jako fakt hodně dobrý, ale možná jste o nich třeba ani nevěděli. Tak jo. Yeah, Brad, you can start.
Okay, good. Good afternoon. So this will be a little bit about Blender and some features that I've helped get into the software. Can you hear me okay? Good. There's a bunch of features, obviously, in Blender that have been added over the years. We're going to focus on 5, and it'll be a little bit related to rigging and animation, but it's also just core to how I've approached learning and being involved in the Blender community. So I'm happy to be here, and I hope that you get some good information out of this. First, who am I? My name is Brad Clark. I've been teaching since I was 19 years old. I'm now 40-something years old. I'm working for Ozone. We do character rigging and deformation. I just worked on a project for Love, Death, and Robots that just came out on Netflix, which was really cool. And unfortunately, that was not Blender. It was Maya and Unreal, but I continue to use Blender, and Blender was used on the project, so it's nice to be able to work in a bigger pipeline and still know that Blender is usable. I have contributed to the Blender animation module since I got started learning Blender, so it's been 4 years of starting out just learning Blender and then contributing to it, actually submitting code and working on features. The NLA was the nonlinear animation section of Blender that I couldn't really find much information on, and so I started looking into it for motion capture editing and working on trying to understand if Blender was usable for me. And I realized there were a lot of good ideas, but it needed some work, so I started contributing and ended up getting flown to Amsterdam and meeting the team behind Blender, and that was a really kind of a crash course into understanding open source software development, and it was a really nice community, and being able to contribute directly to the software and make it better for me when I want to use it is a great thing. And Sebron, who does the animation module meetings and runs a lot of the code, took that picture of me while I was there, so I'm happy to use that. Okay, so we know Flow just came out and was a great success, and a lot of the features that we're going to talk about, aren't as sexy as a full film. So just prepare. Some of these are very basic, but I want you to understand one of these features was something that took almost a year to get into the software. So, even when you see something simple in Blender, just understand that if you want to contribute something, your expectation for how long it takes is going to have to be adjusted. So I thought, well, this thing sounded easy. I just want this feature, and everyone else wanted it, and then it took a while. So let's get started. I started using it when 2.8 came out, and was still, they started to create the new interface. And then I got more involved in kind of the 2.9 and started, 2.9.3 and 3.0. I started really using it a lot. June 3.2 came out and had some of the first work I did. And then it took all the way till now to get some of the features in that I wanted way back from 2019. So you have to be persistent. This is just to give you a timeline of understanding, there's been a huge amount of development even in a short few years, but I still, if I wanted something in, I had to wait until basically this last release to get some of the stuff I wanted into the software. So patience is a must. Okay, this is going to be the first feature, and this actually just came up. So for those who don't know, before 3.2 of Blender, if you parented two objects together, and I just stuck this in my hand and moved it away, if I zeroed the transformations, it would shoot off to the middle of the world. It would always go to the origin. And this is very different than any other software I had used. And it was also a problem when you were trying to organize a hierarchy or build something without an armature, without building a skeleton. So I learned that Blender, when you parented two objects together and kept one in place, if I parented my phone to my hand and I wanted it to stay here, it would hide the values. And the only way you could find them was through a script. So one of the first things I asked for and tried to figure out was, can we fix this? And so keep transform without inverse is a big word, big name, but it means that it parents objects, and instead of hiding the values, it puts them into the actual transform of the space of the locator or the object. So then when you zero it, it actually goes to the parent. And this is how most other software behave, but there are good reasons Blender didn't do this. But when you're coming from other tools, or you're trying to organize a big scene of geometry, or build rigs that aren't in the armature, you couldn't do this, and there was no way to know that it was there, and it caused a lot of problems for a lot of people. There were constant questions online, so this was the first thing I tried to get fixed, and it took a while, but it still took until 3.2 of Blender. So we go back in time again and know that, like, from the start of using Blender all the way to from 2019 to 2022, this feature didn't exist. And so it took that many versions to get the feature requested and do the testing and find a developer to actually program it. And it's very simple. It was already there. It just was hidden. So that's the first one. Keep transform without inverse. Understanding this is really important if you're trying to animate something and you want to parent a locator or parent a null to something and bake it and then constrain it back. So this is something people do in animation all the time, or you want to track a marker. So being able to do this at the object level is great. The second thing, and this was one of the first things I discovered all the animators wanted that came from other software, was parent space manipulation, which means, and like, this is, again, these are basic ideas. I have one object parented or as a child of another, and when I move it around, when I zero it, I want it to go to the object, not the origin. And then if I'm animating and I have a control, I want to be able to move on an individual axis and control it and not keyframe all the channels. So it was 3.6 got this feature, and again, it was requested 4 years ago. When I started using Blender, I saw animators requesting it, Jason Schleifer from like everybody that wanted to animate in Blender, we all wanted this feature. And it didn't exist. There was no way to move something in its parent space. And that meant, if I remove the parent space, it means your graph editor, the animation curve matches the information and how you manipulate it. So it's equal. When you keyframe something, it is in parent space, but you couldn't manipulate it that way. So you're always in two different places. But again, 4 years ago, everyone wanted it. There were threads on right click select. It took 2 years later for us to even bring it up, and people kept asking for it, but no one did anything about it. And then Nate Rupus and I were already in the animation module, and it took us a year of code. It took us a year for him to start programming it, and then we had to get approval for the icon from the UI team in Blender. We needed a parent space icon. We needed to add it to the main menu. We needed to define its behavior, and it took 47 commits, which means 47 rounds of him coding the plugin, adding it to the Blender main repository, testing it. We'd find a problem, he'd fix it, and we would meet over and over again and work on this simple tool for almost a year. And then we missed the deadline. So Blender releases in different time frames, and when you get close to releasing, if you are still trying to add a feature, if you miss the deadline, you can't get it added. And we had one more bug that we were trying to fix and we couldn't get it in time, and we tried to get it rushed, but we just, so even then it was like I had to wait another release for it to actually show up. So this is a very simple thing. Unreal just added this last year. They have a plugin to basically add parent transform for the animators. So just so you know, we beat Unreal to get this feature, but this didn't exist in Blender, and it took 4 years of work and requests and community involvement, and then it took a developer. Well, it took me and a developer to say this is worth the time to do it. This is why we want it, and then we had to work and test it and do all this development for something that on the surface looks very simple. So now you know it's there. You know that you can parent things and keep them relative to their parent, and now you can also manipulate these things in parent space. So those are two features that people still don't realize. I think if they do realize it's there, they don't know how long it took to get there and what's involved. So when you see people asking or saying, I wish Blender did this thing, get involved, right? Show up and show up at a module meeting, put a request in, get community feedback, and then expect to work for a year if you can find a developer. All right, this one, I don't know if I can see some of you. Who animates in the room? Raise a hand. I see. Okay, good. Okay, yeah, a little bit. All right, good. So there is a great plugin and AutoRig Pro. And if you look at AutoRig Pro and in their documentation, way down in the tips and tricks, there was a small mention about removing custom normals on a mesh. And that means like if you have a hard edge on something, or just the normals are not auto smooth. It was a little note that was like, if you clear custom normals, your rig will run faster. And I was like, okay, interesting. And I kind of forgot about it. And then I had to animate something, and I was getting like 5 or 10 frames per second. And I remembered that I went to look and see if this had custom normals. It did. I cleared them, and my frame rate doubled. So I went from like 10 FPS to 20. So automatically just getting rid of normals doubled my frame rate. And I brought this up to the module meetings, and they're like, well, normals is not animation related. And so I started talking to Hans Gulby, and he's doing a bunch of stuff with he created the new auto smooth function and was doing a bunch of stuff with normals at the time already, and geometry nodes, and doing all this great work. And I messaged him and I said, hey, I don't know if we can fix this, but just, do you know that it's this slow? And they're like, well, make a test scene, do all this stuff. I couldn't convince anybody. And so the long story is I worked very hard to build examples of Suzanne with a lot of polygons, just with a simple bone structure, animating back and forth. And with the custom normals, it immediately it cut the frame rate in half every time. It was very consistent. So I sent that to him, and he's like, oh yeah, that's a problem. And a little while later, he said, hey, we've got this simplify. What if we just turn the normals off for simplify? And if you don't know about the simplify feature, it just turns off subdivision. You can change particles but not edit the scene. So it automatically speeds up your file. But now there's a checkbox in I think basically 4 point. I don't remember. It's like in the 4.0 versions of Blender, that if you turn on the check, it turns off the normals, and your frame rate will double if you had custom normals on a deforming mesh. So if your character's running slow and you have simplify on, and you have custom normals for creases, or that the modeler created them and you don't know they're there, you potentially just turning simplify on and then turning on the normals check mark to quit thinking about normals will give you double your frame rate back. So almost all the scenes I animate now in Blender run at 30 frames or 40 frames a second. and that's, you know, each character, it can be dramatic. So definitely check that out. It's a very new feature. It's kind of hidden away. It's a very simple thing, but it adds a huge amount of performance boost. So definitely worth knowing about it. And this simple check mark exists because I just wasn't happy with having to destroy my mesh over and over again, and I wanted them to see if they could speed it up for everybody, right? I wanted my animation to run faster and not have to know that I need to clear these normals. And you know, we worked it back and forth until we got this option, which is really, really cool. So that's another kind of hidden thing, but it directly applies to suddenly your animation runs faster. Okay, since there's animators in the room, and we're going to talk about the NLA a little bit and animation layers. And there is an add-on for animation layers, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the concept of the NLA as an animation layer workflow. And the first thing that causes problems is that you couldn't, when you used a bunch of layers, you couldn't edit that layer and see the final result. So if you look on the right hand side of the screen, you see the manipulator by the leg, but the leg is sitting, you know, the leg is down instead of up for the manipulation. And that's because I'm editing a layer, but it was only showing it was showing the wrong result. And Blender had a feature hidden around inside the menu of the strip menu called full stack. And it was, I didn't understand what it did. It wasn't obvious, and the default behavior didn't do this, which meant when you enter, you know, if I have 4 layers and I go in and edit the middle layer, it turns everything off. So your animation changes. And that's a problem because now you are editing your layer or action individually instead of in context of what the actual pose is. And so now you can see in the middle section with full stack on, when I edit this layer or I go into tweak mode, my manipulator and the foot are lifted up. So I can actually edit the foot layer and still see the hands and the body and everything else. And that just really took, the feature existed already, but it took meeting after meeting to decide this start tweaking full stack would become the default. So when you hit tab on the keyboard, it's really just a shortcut change. But to do that for the entire Blender community and make that decision, we had to work together as a team and get feedback and decide what is that going to change and will people understand it. And so now when you are in the NLA and you go to hit tab, it defaults to editing in full stack mode so that you can actually always see the whole pose. Your character doesn't jump and change, which was a huge improvement, and it made it much easier to actually use as a layer system. Before that, this happened in like, I think the 3.6 LTS or a little earlier, but in the middle of that development cycle, you know, before that, you had to either know about full stack and change the hotkey yourself, or you just assumed that it was broken. And the other thing that came out of this was that we discovered when you default to full stack, some things would break or not work correctly. And so we got a bunch of bug fixes around this, just deciding to do this. Now, the second part of making animation layers work with the NLA is when you bake animation, there was no way to bake custom properties. So if you've used a Rigify rig and you grab the star at the shoulder and you switch IK to FK, those properties, the custom attributes that were on the wrist, you couldn't animate in layers and then bake all that down to a new action. It didn't understand how to do that. So again, my friend Nate started working on baking custom properties into the bake action window. Now, one of the first things 4 years ago when I started learning Blender, I tried this and I couldn't figure out how to make it work because every time I'd animate in a layer and bake it, I'd hit play and it wouldn't match because it was missing those properties. And I realized that I put a video up on like this is a problem. Someone made a small script for me after I put the video up online about how the NLA didn't bake. So I had this little kind of custom baking script in Blender for years until 4.4. Like until the last like release of Blender, we now finally have custom properties, and you can now turn that on, and also you can limit what you bake. So if you didn't want to accidentally add scale keyframes to everything, you can now turn that off when you bake your animation. So this was the second part to make the core NLA tool function as an animation layer workflow for everyone coming from Maya or Unreal or any in Max. Like everybody has some kind of layer system, but Blender had half of the features, but it was missing the other half to actually make it work. So now what this means is that you can animate in Rigify, you can animate with the animation layers, and when you bake the action with custom properties, all your IK/FK switches work. If you have animated materials or any custom properties, face animation, all those things will now bake down, and you can actually use it as a full layer system. And again, that didn't exist 4 years ago, and it took almost 4 years. It took 3 years to get this request to even be understood, to be added as an option that we need to add it to the UI. And then I needed to find a developer that would be able to code it and understand how to add it to the bake. And then we had to have meetings and test it. And and then, you know, again, it's just adding this option. But then while we were there, we were saying, well, maybe we can improve this and add some extra things like just bake location and rotation. Because one of the other things with layers is if you bake scale, sometimes the scale will blow your character up. So those are 4 of the features. Now, the 5th feature really is removing how all of this stuff works. And if you've seen the slotted actions, or you've seen the discussion around Project Baklava, it was thinking about how to change how Blender does all of its animation. And we don't have time today to get into it, but I just want to emphasize that that system is still new. And as much as I would like a brand new animation system and new layer system, it took at least a full year to even figure out, can we flip inside out the way Blender does actions? And if you haven't looked at the slotted actions yet in new Blender, they basically, if you think of it just as a folder of actions, it lets you group everything together so that you don't have, you know, if you have a object and a character, you don't have to separate. You don't end up with like 5 actions, right? If you have an object, a light, the character. If I have a character holding a lantern and I want to animate the light properties and I want to animate the camera together and I want that to be shared, you can now group all of that into one action, and each slot is assigned to the character, to the light, to the cube. So you have objects, you have armatures, and you have lights all inside your main action of exploring, right? And so that is the start. There's still all these new features to make animation layers good and to make new NLA, but that stuff is coming based on all of the work we did up to this point. And then we had to basically flip inside out the way it works, because right now the NLA is actions inside of one action, one armature, one object. And so we wanted to be able to group everything together. So that's really that's a very public feature, but understanding how it gets used, people are still struggling with. So I just wanted to mention it because it's an accumulation of years of work. And I want to thank Sebrin for doing all that. So last, I'm going to be in person in the Czech Republic. I'm going to be there doing a lab in September, and through the Anomalia workshop, you get last year to get 82% off or covered. And I would love to see people there in person, come to the workshop. So this will be a mix of Blender, Maya, and Unreal, and it'll be focused on indie game development, but it'll be how to rig and animate and use all the new tools to just get work done, right? So if you want to understand how to take an AI character from a mesh machine, or your friend gives you a model, or how to quickly rig something and get it animated. And this character here, this crab creature, we'll learn how to rig it, and it's a big heavy mesh. So there's a bunch of ways to work efficiently inside of Blender, or work with Maya and Unreal teams. And if you've seen the Electric State on Netflix, I have a friend who he and I worked out a workflow between Blender and Unreal for him to do all the previs for that. So we did a bunch of work to make it fast for him to animate and use motion capture and send it to Unreal. And that all came through Blender, and it was really efficient. So with that, I will say thank you, and we can leave it up for some QA, and we can talk about anything else that people want, but I appreciate it.
OK, tak dáme 3 otázky. Brad will do 3 questions, OK?
Perfect.
Kde dáme kostičku? Jo, tamhle zase. Zase je tam? Tam se nějak resetuje vždycky. Tak kdo si dá nějakou otázku? Já mu to potom jakoby řeknu do notebooku. Můžete klidně v češtině, jako když tak. Moc ne, blíž? Co to asi vybilo? No počkej, já ti přinesu mikrofon. No.
Mám v češtině nebo v angličtině?
On tě neuslyší, protože to tenhle čas, že?
Dobře.
Tak si to tam.
Tak jo. Když animujete se slotted akcema, tak, a máte právě víc objektů, tak pořád musíte přepínat u všech objektů tu main akci. I když vlastně jsou tak grupnutý do sebe, jo? Tak, ale pořád to musíte prostě přepínat na všech objektech separátně. Takže oni nejsou momentálně teďka moc useful.
Já to musím pochopit. Máš hodně objektů a na nich je hodně akcí a...
Jo. Máš akci a ona teďka akce fungují jako složky. Takže moje podakce jsou ty slotted akce.
Ty vete,
Ty jsi měl grupnutý do sebe.
Okay, Brad, he's asking about actions, like you have a lot of objects and they have actions, and that right now actions are acting as folders.
Yes. Yeah, so the slotted actions are the brand new feature for Blender, where I think 4.4 has them now. So when you create the old legacy system, if I have 2 cubes or 2 Suzannes, when I animate one and the other, they both create separate actions. So it creates, they're independent of each other. And if I wanted to append them to a new Blender or edit them in the NLA, they were completely separate. So now you can use the slotted actions, which means I can create one action called Suzanne Dance, let's say. And then when I animate them, I can assign each of the 2 Suzanne 1 and Suzanne 2 to a slot. So Suzanne Dance is both of their animations together. And when I want to append that to a new Blender scene, or I want to edit it in the NLA, I see it as one folder or one action. And it makes it very easy to then share more complicated animations when you don't have an armature driving everything, right? The only way to do it in old Blender up until now was if I have a bunch of objects that I want to animate together and keep that animation in one action, I'd have to make an armature and then assign like a bone in the armature per object so that I could control them all and keep it in one place. So that's it allows all the objects, all the animation on anything to be grouped together as one block. Does that make sense?
Okay, we'll take the next question.
Kdo má
Okay.
otázku? Já zkusím tady to teďko. Ty vole, to umím. Funguje to teda nebo ne? Mělo by to.
Neviem. Počuť? Okay, hi. I wanted to ask you about Gaussian splatting. I know there's some support
Cože?
for it.
Ne, promiň, já nevím, jak... Řekni to radši česky, když tak. Já mu to stejně musím říct, on tě podle
Aha, dobre. Blender má nejaký support pre Gaussian splatting. Je to nová technika, ktorou sa dá reprezentovať v grafike veľa nových vecí. A existuje tiež práca, ktorá sa volá Gaussian frosting. A chcel som sa spýtať, či to bude mať nejaký oficiálny support v Blenderi.
Frosting, jako zmrzlina.
Frosting.
Jo.
Okay, he's asking about Gaussian splatting and Gaussian frosting, if you know something about that.
I don't. It sounds delicious. I know that the Gaussian splatting is, it's a way to capture things. I haven't done much with it. I do have some friends, though, that are using it, and it's interesting. I just haven't done much with it. Sorry.
Tak další otázka na rigging. No, tamhle vzadu. Super.
How would you say, how is currently Blender doing compared to Maya when it comes to performance when working with heavier rigs and models?
Did you hear? No, so he's asking how is Blender doing compared to Maya with like complex rigs and animations, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good one to end on. The short answer is Maya is still faster when you optimize for when you have a GPU, like a big NVIDIA or AMD card. Its deformer system is fully GPU enabled, so it can handle and run much faster with a lot of characters. That said, Blender with the turning off the custom normals and being efficient with how you use modifiers, and a few friends of mine are starting to use geometry nodes to deform their characters. So imagine this will be some Googling and research for you. Sony, for example, has offset curve deformer. It's like a bendy bone basically, but they've got a patent on it and they've used it for all kinds of character animation. You can re-implement that in geometry nodes, and geometry nodes are very, very fast, and in some cases faster than the regular armature modifier. So the short answer is Maya is still faster because they've got a lot more GPU multi-threaded parallel evaluation code that they've spent the last 10 years making faster. But Blender is so much quicker in a lot of other ways that you can still optimize the rigs and be plenty fast enough, right? For animation, you only need to be above 24 FPS, 24 frames per second. So as long as you can, adjust your rigging and you know about the simplify modifier to turn off normals, and you explore some geometry nodes as alternatives for deformation, you can potentially, you can run fast enough to work. And honestly, if you really, really need some kind of like thousands of characters, you can still use caching and other things, or you can animate in Unreal and go back and forth, right? So again, Unreal's free as well, but if you really, really need super fast performance, you can still animate back and forth. But I found Blender being plenty fast enough, and in a lot of ways faster, just because it's less destructive. So, speed is relative. Maya still wins in the pure numbers speed race, but a lot of people still don't rig efficiently in Maya, and it's easy to slow it down. So Blender has gotten faster and faster, and some of the animation tools, when you actually come to editing an animation with, let's say, 10,000 curves, Blender wins hands down. So.
Okay, Brad, cool. And my question is, what's the first thing that you would love to do when you're in Czech Republic?
I think just go for a walk in the countryside. It looks beautiful there, and I like being outside. I'm going to go spend the day shooting archery today and be outside as much as possible. So I just want to enjoy the country and meet as many people and see as much as I can, and then see all the creative work. So yeah, I think just take in the countryside. It looks beautiful.
What about beer?
Yes, that also will work. After the walk.
First beer, then beer.
Okay,
Beer, coffee, and walks will definitely work.
Thank you very much. I'll just give the word to David, who will introduce Anomalia a little bit more. So like you can
Perfect.
stay around, and then thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks, everybody. You can find me online, and I'm happy to answer questions. So appreciate it. Have a great rest of your conference.